This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Why don't you go ahead and share the board, Bob, and I can just talk through it.
Okay.
All right, and I'm also just going to be mindful of the chat. It seems some people are just having issues accessing this board. If you sent me your email address, I have added you to this. Just ensure you got a confirmation from Trello and it's not in your spam folder. Also, if you gave me a different email address, make sure you check that one, because sometimes people have multiple email addresses and they get lost in this. But if you can log into Trello, you should be able to get here. And you should have had the Zoom link. That's why we're all here. So Lean Coffee is simply a visualization of flow, and we don't have any fixed agendas or topics to talk about. This is something that's dynamic and it evolves. So as you can see in the few swim lanes that I created, we have to do, these are topics to discuss, and then we have the in progress, and these are a few things that were happening. And Bob, while you're here, maybe you can just click on the PMINJ announcements from John C. and move it over to Don. It's as simple as that. What's happening in the present and what could we possibly see in the near future? If we have any hiccups along the way, we can be blocked, or there's a pause, and we can put these cards over here. So it's interesting, we joined a little early. We have a few introductions, a few casual conversations, and those are the sound checks as well. So Bob just dragged another item there. Now we're also going to be ranting about COVID-19, and we're going to have all kinds of memes and lighthearted conversations as serious as this is. So that's just in progress. And also in progress is add PMINJ members to the board, because I'm still going to get texts and say, hey, could you add me to this board? And also you could randomly ad hoc add some topics to the left. So very quickly, I'm just going to write one thing in the chat for my email address in case you want to send me something to be added. That's it. Now on the left, let's focus a little bit here. So what I'm doing right now, I'm actually explaining the Lean Coffee, which is the second card. So again, Bob, you can just click and drag there. And we have a multitude of real topics below that some people have proactively added, which is great. I'm just going to read off a few. Sharing a dev QA team among several projects. That is multiple product owners. Second one is working with offshore teams. The third one is how to visualize work, manage WIP, that's work in progress, and plan work, Kanban, for teams having a mix of support tickets and waterfall sequential projects. So even here, there's only so much you can do in a swim lane. So in the progress, I've got explain Lean Coffee, COVID, add PMI, PMI members. So those are about 4 things between Bob and I can handle. So those are the WIP limits. The one thing we can do, if you actually click on one of these cards, so Bob on the left, how about we click on the sharing a QA team among several projects. If we scroll a bit to the right, we have an option to vote. That's just simply giving it up a thumbs up. It's towards the end. And this is helpful when there are a multitude of topics that are out there, and we want to kind of order it in a way, what should we tackle first? Or what is it that more people are interested in? And if you go back to the board, because Bob gave that thumbs up, we'll see the number 1 there. So it's a very fair way of just asking the audience, what are you interested in talking about today? If there are a multitude of cards. So let me pause for a moment and encourage everybody, if you have any topics, you can either just put it in the chat or take a shot at it. You can add another card to the left, and I'll just go back to the board for a few minutes and add a few other members who are requesting that. And Bob, if you got anything else, feel free to just jump in.
Okay, what alternate uses? I use Trello for remote retrospectives. Basically, you don't have to do not started in progress done. You could do appreciate, happy, sad, could be doing better. You could have different columns like that. And when you're working with your team, you would give them access to Trello, and then they could add their own comments in the different columns. You could then vote as a team as far as the topics that the team wants to, wants to actually take action on. So don't just get locked into the fact that it's a Kanban board. You can actually be creative and use it for other ways. Actually, on Friday, I'm planning to use this with my team. My team has been used to working co-located in Jersey City, so it's a big change for them. So I'm trying all these different types of tools to see, how we can keep it interesting. And if you're actually in the board, you could click on add another card, and you could actually start typing the card. So, you could do it through the chat. You could actually add a card directly to the board. That's the way Trello is designed. It's a pretty neat tool. And the nice thing about it, it's free. It doesn't really cost you any money, which is nice in this day and age with budgets being tight and everything.
Very quickly, I have been adding people in the background, so hopefully you're getting some Trello confirmations to get in. I'm just about to add Paul next.
So it looks like people are voting. I like that. 2 people voted for how to visualize work. So this is everyone's lean coffee. The other option would be if you want to just say what you'd like to talk about, and either Nitin and I will type it in as a card. You don't need to be bashful. Ideally, what we would do is come up with a much longer list and then let the team vote and decide as far as what they want to talk about. So while Nitin's doing that, I'm going to mark this as done because we don't want to spend the whole meeting adding people to the board. I'm not seeing many new cards, so we're going to actually end up marking this one done. And what you want to do is you want to minimize your in progress. So basically, you can keep a focus on it. If there's a lot of things, it's difficult to keep having the team stay focused. When I'm working with my team, what I usually try to get them to do is only have one item in progress. Sometimes they have to have 2, only because sometimes you start something, you have to wait. You're waiting for somebody to get back to you or things like that. So some people would have 2 things in progress, but a good rule of thumb is to always try to limit your in progress for each developer to 1 or 2 items. It sounds like it's not really that productive, but if you look at the Scrum value focus, that really helps a lot. It allows the team member to actually focus on one thing and actually get it done. And sometimes less experienced developers, they might pick up 3, 4, 5, 6 things and they'll get them all started. And then what happens by the time you get to the end of the sprint, nothing gets done because the person is bouncing between the multiple tasks. So Nitin, I'm seeing 5 votes is how to visualize work, manage work in progress, and plan work for team having a mix of support tickets and waterfall sequential projects. So it's looking like that is coming up pretty strong. Do you want to get started?
Yep, so let's see. Besides the 5s, what else do we have? We've got the 3 below that. And do we have anything else in order? How do we decide Scrum versus Kanban? And very quickly, I sent a generic link to everybody in case you've not been able to get on. You should be able to just follow the link on the chat. All right, let's do the first one then, Bob. How to visualize work, manage whips. Got an echo here. If you're not talking, put yourself on mute.
So my name is Daniel Cohen, and I wrote that one, so I thought maybe I'd just tee it up so people could talk about it.
Sure, give us some context.
So I work in an organization where we do mostly Scrum, Agile software development. I work also with an infrastructure team that does, we're all cloud-based, so we stand up clusters, we put in place new infrastructure components, whether it's middleware or new types of, database as a service. And the same team also has a series of sort of operational tickets like break, fix, add users, typical operational work. And we need a way to manage these things together. Kanban could work well for the operational work, but it's kind of hard to figure out how either Kanban or Scrum would work well for waterfall type projects. We don't have, it's not software development, it's really different. It's not like we have a bunch of features or stories that need to get moved around depending on customer reaction or customer experience. We pretty much know what we need to do and we know what order we need to do it in and we execute it. But they need to manage their work because at one time. So I don't want to just have a whole bunch of project schedules to do work. We need a way to control the things they work on and balance project work with support work. So that's the 30,000-foot view.
Okay, thank you for that. And very quickly, if you're not talking, please mute your mics. It causes an echo. So the first thing to ask, and this is just my opinion, I'm sure Bob will chime in as well. Hey, what flavor of agility should we use? Should we use Scrum or should we use Kanban or should we use something else? And waterfall and Scrum really don't mix well. So you're kind of on the right track to say, what else could we consider? I have worked with teams that have a few different value streams, and Kanban is well suited. This is when you don't necessarily need a predictable outcome with timelines, such as you need something delivered every 2 to 4 weeks. This also works really well with the operations and ad hoc tickets, support systems, and so on. If you start getting a multitude of people, it could get a little messy because ideally you want to have one team focusing on a vision or at least a program. So what I would start doing if you already started venturing into this is experiment a little bit with the metadata, the labels, the coloring to see who can do what, and just have a separate swim lane depicting that. So that adds to the visualization a little bit, and start having some conversations with people to what is the expected outcome in terms of timeline, if any, and if it could be rationalized that way. I wouldn't venture into Scrum just yet unless you truly have the transparency of what's going on. And Kanban will certainly help you with that. So you're already doing a little bit of it. I would venture into Scrum if you feel you can get a few developers, a good Scrum Master, and a voice of the customer, like a product owner, to say, hey, you know, we do need something every few weeks, and we want to be able to huddle and just be able to demo that and take it from there. Now, it could also be that these teams lean into each other. Should you have one smaller team that ventures into Scrum, they could still be pulling some items from what they see in the Kanban board. But that, again, is a conversation to how that work would be coordinated. So just a few of my thoughts over there in the flavors of agility, getting the visualization, and the coordination.
How do you envision with Kanban putting, using dates? So for example, if there's a deliverable by a certain date, Kanban isn't, from the way I've used it and read about it, isn't friendly towards that. It's very much pull something out of a stack and work on it. What's your experience with aligning that approach to having schedule requirements?
You can do that. So just what I can do, for example, this very card itself, just using Trello as a tool, if I click, there is a due date on it. And let me just do this. I'm going to put in a due date for this. And instead of tomorrow, let me do it today at 6:27, save. So hopefully, if you look at the board now, yep, there it is. You're going to see a little yellow highlighted item, due March 25th. So that's the first thing. You could use the tool and get dates right on the board itself. You could also assign people to this. Kanban does work well with dates. The first thing is just put it in there. Say, we need this by such and such date. And as it gets closer, people will, again, be able to visualize it and then huddle to see if you're going to be missing it or keeping it, or if there's some alternatives to be done. Does that help a little bit?
Sure, it does give me something to think about.
Sure.
Does anybody else on the call have ideas about this?
Sure, this is Bob. If you have a Scrum team, a lot of people get a little bit confused because the Scrum team is actually the team that does the support. What we normally do is we have one member volunteer during each sprint to provide support for the application, with the understanding that if they get overrun, they can call for help. And what this allows is the team to actually work and get the Scrum goals met, but while also providing support to the actual project. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion there, but I mentioned the support tickets, and that basically support, if it was a Scrum team, would be done by the Scrum team itself. And then you could use a tool like Jira or even Trello, where you would actually have the different support items come in.
Hey, Bob, this is Henry. I'd like to contribute too.
Sure.
Sure. So one thing to keep in mind is that, like, project management and Agile have their place. I think you may have seen slides before that show the a mapping of projects or activities that you want to accomplish. And project management works good if you have a well-defined goal and you have well-defined requirements. Agile is better for when things are being developed as they go and maybe your goal is not as well known, or if there's a business urgency and you want to try to get some minimum viable product out first. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. And then the other thing is that for operational type things, you might want to look at SCRUMBON. It's a combination of Scrum and Kanban. You can Google that and find lots of information on it, but I know of teams that are using that work in the operational space.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. And just to supplement that, all Scrum says is the work should be visualized. And they borrowed from Kanban to help visualize that work. Now, interestingly, Scrum.org, which is a certifying body, recently introduced a certification with Professional Scrum with Kanban, and there's a lightweight read on it as well. So I've included that in the chat. I've worked with Scrum teams that have actually not used a Kanban type view, but they still managed to depict what's going on in a different way for the team itself and the stakeholders. So lots of ideas there about. So we've got a few other topics as well, but want to check very quickly. Do we want to keep talking about this a little bit, or should we move on to something else?
I'm comfortable with, as the person who brought it up, I'm comfortable with what we've talked about. So thank you all for your comments.
Sure. So again, Bob just moved that card to done. And we didn't have a formally defined definition of done because it's a lean coffee, but just did a light check-in, and the person who put it in said, yep, that's fine. Let's go on to the next one. How do you change how a co-located team works when all of a sudden everyone is remote? Wow. I was wondering.
Well, I added this one because I experienced it firsthand.
Oh, okay. Give us more context.
Well, basically the strategy at BNY Mellon was they were going to send half employees home every 2 weeks, and then the other half stays in the office. So we were figuring out ways how we were going to be able to do our Scrum, and we were kind of trying to time things so that we would have the main events done in the office. But then as things started getting a little bit more serious and scary, the organization decided to send everybody 100% remote. So now all of a sudden, my team, who's used to actually being co-located, where we actually have a team room, and on previous sessions I've actually shared where we have a board where people actually create post-it notes, and we actually physically move things around. So all that kind of had to change because we're no longer in the office together. Also, I do a lot of retrospectives with my team, a lot of hands-on work, a lot of storyboarding, diagramming. So my teams are used to actually moving around and being active. So just as one example, and then I'll let Nitin share his insights. We, instead of creating our subtasks, because what we do is when the team volunteers for items, actually two things I want to share. Agile poker, planning poker, we did using cards, physical cards where people would actually vote. However, if you use Jira, there's a Agile poker option where the team can actually vote online electronically, and that was actually the first time I really used it. I've actually talked to other teams about it, but I never actually used it for my team, and I will say that it worked really well. So we were able to actually point our cards virtually. That worked well. And then as far as the subtasks, Jira has that capability where when you have an item in Jira, you can create subtasks. So what we did was we had the team actually create subtasks in Jira as part of our Sprint Planning Part 2 meeting. And then as part of the daily Scrum that we do, I created a Kanban board in Jira where actually it's sorted by the person that volunteered. And when each person is speaking, I show that section of the board. So basically that's pretty much one way that, we kind of adapted. And right now, where I'm struggling the most is figuring out how to keep the retrospective interesting, because nothing beats having the team there. But we're definitely experimenting and coming up with ways. And I've used Trello before when I had a team in Pune, and that worked well. So I'm going to actually be using it with my team on Friday. And I can let everybody know how that worked out. So Nitin, did you have any ways that you've adapted?
I think you've done a lot of good things already, Bob. I work with a financial institute that was having one team co-located for one initiative, but part of their disaster management program actually mandated one random day in the year that suddenly there would be some simulation and everybody just had to be working remotely just to see what would happen. Now, this is a team, again, they use Post-it notes on the wall, they use blue painter's tape for swim lanes. And what I did was I just supplemented this with Trello. Again, it's a popular tool. It worked really well. And it just so happened that they were, it took a while to get used to it, but they were doing both, everything on the wall as well as a little bit of Trello every day. So when they were off-site, they seemed to do well with this. It worked well with retrospectives as well. And then there are other techniques that could be used. But it can always be a change, right? Anytime you're off, and how do you make it fun? How do you make it entertaining? I don't know, Bob, maybe you can get a mask and start coughing really loudly and say, don't worry, I'm okay. And then just disappear for a while and then come back. By the way, that's a Scrum Master technique. When the Scrum Master disappears, what happens? The team kind of gets together. So there are actually other things you could do to leverage this opportunity. But I'm curious because everybody's going to have a little different situation here. But I would just agree with you, Bob. Just keep doing what you're doing and find ways of entertaining the crowd. Anybody else have any ideas? Do you have offshore teams or remote teams where you use tools? How do you keep it fun and engaging?
Well, there is in addition to planning poker, there's an online retrospective tool where you can do keep, start, stop, and then discuss it and vote on it. Actually, VSTS has one that's kind of an add-in called Estimate is the planning poker, and then Retro is the retrospective tool. Both are built into VSTS, or add-ons into VSTS, more correctly.
Oh, thank you, Charles. If you can give us the link in the chat, that would also be great, if you just remember it.
When you go into VSTS, you have to go into add-ins, and if your organization allows those add-ins, they'll be there.
Oh, okay.
It's not something. So we aren't allowed to to use Trello or whatnot because they don't want to put company business on the internet. So for us, it's very good that VSTS has the tools built in.
That's also a good point. People are very protective of what's going on, even though it might be something for just one team, one retrospective. It's still company information. It could be proprietary, confidential. People could say a few things. It could go out, and who knows how people will use it. So we have to be careful about that. Anybody else have any other ideas?
Just a comment on that, though, is that it just occurred to me. I do a lot of, or have done a lot of work with organizations, and they really don't like their information getting out. So that once you get into where you're not having a co-located team, like we would be a vendor for them, and not having a co-located team could be a disaster in that regard, because if you're not physically present, right, you can't use these tools, right? It's going to be very, very limited what you can, how you can manage that.
Well, there's a counter sort of cultural point of view. I work for a SaaS company, and everything we do is online. We have an information security team that keeps track of everything and makes sure we adhere to the highest standards. We have multi-factor authentication. There's so much of our society that has highly protected data that's online that there are lots and lots of businesses that use it retail and also use it internally. So I think it's more of a cultural mindset within a company than it is a technology challenge.
Well, it's certainly, that's the case. It's not a technology challenge because we're talking about, in this case, the U.S. government and certain state governments. So those organizations can be very, very stingy. Like they don't send their employees home with a laptop at all, for example, right? If you're not on site, you're not working, right? So you could see where that could be a little tough if you wanted to do something like with a public board like this or something. Other organizations I have seen have had internal tools, right? Which are totally within their VPN. When I was working for Nokia, that was the case, right? But so some of these things could be available, but not things that are, they would have to have some sort of a private version of this tool, or some way made secure. right? For example, we used to use Cisco Jabber, but you could only use it from within our VPN.
Yep, all great comments. I would also like to just supplement by saying, I think it's also a little bit about inclusion. So to give you an example, I was working with one team in media and technology, and almost everybody was co-located. I ran into a situation where one person was in New York, and for some reason he could not travel. We had to have a retrospective, and just for that one person, I set up a Trello board. And we had the cameras, we could see what people are putting on the wall, but we didn't want to have him left out. So again, it's not necessarily a technological challenge, it's a cultural shift, a combination of things, and that's what was used. So it depends on the organization, the culture, the tools, how you want to get this going. It's going to be different for every team.
This is going to be a long time thing though, like what we're going through right now, right? It's something to think about as a move for co-location and to be ready at any given moment to not be co-located.
Indeed. And I also think about startups who don't necessarily have a physical office, but they rent space like WeWork. So on occasion, they need to huddle together and they can do that at a location as needed. So I'm also seeing some of that that's happening as well. Bob, let's go back to you. Do you feel there's been ample discussion on this, or is there anything else you'd like to hear about or get insights on? Do you want to talk to yourself about it?
I think that was very good. Thanks everyone for the insights they shared.
Okay, so how about we call it a done? So again, Bob's just going to click and drag. What's next?
We have two over here with one vote. Might as well just take the one that's on top. Sharing a dev QA team among several projects, i.e. multiple product owners.
Okay, that one's mine. I was just taking over a new project where it's a Salesforce implementation. They have 4 different product owners and 3 different teams. So in fact, in one case, I have a stand-up with for one area, and then we hang up, and then half an hour later, I have the identical team on another stand-up. Because it, it used to have 2 separate product owners, and now it's 1. So basically, I'm trying to figure out the best way to consolidate and use the resources in a central fashion, but I still will have 3 or 4 product owners. So not very familiar with, for example, Scrum of Scrums or something like that or whatever, but any comments and thoughts on the best way to share a single development QA resource amongst multiple product owners on the same cadence?
My gut reaction is that the approach to take here is similar to how one would manage a portfolio of IT projects, where you would have the product owners work together to prioritize and agree on what the priorities are for the work. Because ultimately, when I think about my own experience, the challenge of having one team driven by multiple stakeholders is conflicting priorities.
Yeah, 100%, yes.
So by getting them to agree on the priorities before they go to the teams, then you can alleviate the pressure on the team that might jerk them around.
Yep, agree with Dan over there. And just to clarify and make sure I heard this correctly, you have 4 product owners, but you have 1 development team that's consuming the work from all those 4 stakeholders, correct?
Yeah, I currently have 3 development teams, but I want to move. And the problem is, though, if one team isn't fully utilized, then we're borrowing resources. And at the end of the day, I don't even know what my velocity is.
Right.
It's kind of a mess. So I'm starting from scratch. And my thought was to see the development team as a single resource. Not only is it better for cross-training and other reasons, but just from an overall, without velocity, I can't do any release planning. I can't do anything, right?
Right.
How big are those teams?
This is,
Pardon me?
How big are the teams?
about six to seven people. They're all primarily offshore teams, although I do have at least one onshore technical team lead for each team currently, which I probably would keep 4 technical leads potentially.
Okay. Yeah, keeping that size, it's really where you want the Scrum teams to be, around that size. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, and just let's take a small step back. This is where Scrum is really clear. You need to have one product owner. The product owner is not intended to be a committee. People are certainly well-meaning. People are different subject matter experts. You might have a really large initiative, and you need people to bring in, what to work on next. So Scrum, firstly, is not going to solve this problem. It's always going to be a little loosey-goosey, and you're going to have to look for a true product owner, or perhaps a product owner in chief that LESS, which is large-scale Scrum, talks about. You mentioned Scrum of Scrums, but I would even avoid that, and I don't think that'll help. That's just a coordination effort of multiple Scrum teams coming together to see, what's transparent, what's visible, where are some of the blockers, etc. I do like the first comment where you need to have some sort of a coordination effort or meeting with just the 4 product owners, and have some facilitation by either a Scrum Master or someone saying, hey, given a multitude of things in your wish list, what would you like to see churned out first? What's the order or prioritization? And do you feel it's ready? Thereafter, you have some sort of refinement meeting with those multiple teams before the next sprint starts to say, you know what? Yes, we understand these 3, 5, 10 items. We don't have questions. We can estimate them. And we think by the time we get to sprint planning, there's enough work that'll keep us busy. So you're taking a few earlier intermediary steps just to soften the blow or let people know this is what can be consumed over the next, let's say, 2 weeks or so. So, and I actually had this with one of the initiatives. We had 3 product owners, but we only had 1 dev team. And they all were jostling and fighting and negotiating and charming and saying, yeah, I need my stuff first. But you're going to run into this challenge unless you have that 1 true product owner. So you're going to have to mitigate it some way. And I agree with the first suggestion that was done. So some of my rants there.
That's a good point too about the size of the team. If the dev team gets too large, it's not very Scrum friendly either. It's another good point. We consolidate 3 or 4 dev teams and it gets to be 25 people. That gets on the edge of being too big as well.
I would add one thing is that it might help to have a roadmap. So there's prioritizing tactically what the team might work on the next sprint or 2. But if you can get the product owners to go up a level of abstraction or a level of granularity and talk at some people call them epics, some people call them features, sort of a larger scope of work. What are the business priorities for these larger chunks? And have the product owners kind of fight about that and settle it. Then you can have a roadmap of what may get done on sort of a month or 2-month or quarterly basis. It's not a commitment, but it's directional. And that can help then make decisions about priorities also on a more tactical basis.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yep, very good idea.
When I was at Teach for America, I was very fortunate to have a Salesforce team. And we had I was still early in my Agile career, but we had a front-end team and a back-end team and an offshore team. And basically we had 1 product owner for all 3 teams. And Scrum says it's only 1 product owner that should be driving a team, because I heard the person that brought this up made a comment saying that 1 dev team had 1 meeting and then a little bit later they had another meeting.
Yep.
That's really not fair to the dev team, because now they're getting conflicting priorities. So somehow you should bring out the Scrum guide and talk to all your product owners and have them all agree as far as who's going to be the voice. And basically, I think it would help a lot. And then the other thing with the QA resources, we had QA resources assigned to each of the teams. They were basically individual assignments. So basically, some of my QA people were supporting the back end type of testing. Some of my QA people were supporting the front end type of testing. Another idea might be, again, I don't know, it might not be ideal, but if you have multiple teams, you could stage when the sprints end, because a QA person gets really busy at the beginning and they get really busy toward the end. And so if you stage it so that everybody's not starting exactly the same time and ending the same time, you could help a little bit. But ideally, you want to make those QA resources part of each team.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, all Scrum is encouraging is have a cross-functional, empowered team. And you might be having that opportunity with the number of people that are about, that you could ask, how do they want to position themselves and which team, so that you have a true sense of a talent pool spread out really well. So again, a lot of workarounds are being offered over here. I actually heard a story from one of my mentors that when they were a multitude of product owners, they had some bonuses attached to what they could deliver by the end of the year. And then it got really volatile and sensitive because everybody was really jostling to getting things done. They had to hire an external coach and explain a few things, and some tough decisions had to be made. So just know there's a lot up ahead of you.
Yeah, this is only week 1, but I'm starting to try and formulate my approach to fixing it. So
I think there's a real good nuance you brought up, Nitin, which is that there are senior stakeholders behind the scenes who set up this structure, and they have their interests. And it's often difficult to tackle organizational issues like this without engaging the more senior people.
Yeah, this is a classic shared services problem. So just think of it from that lens as well.
Yes, indeed. So a lot of good comments, a lot of good feedback. Do you want to keep going on this, or?
no, I'm good. Thank you very much. A lot of great insights. I appreciate it.
Okay, this one's from Henry. Can we have a 2-minute overview of Discipline Agile? Let's see, we have about 13 minutes left. There's 2 with 2 votes. So what we could do, I think we have time to do both. So let's bring this one in. Okay, so.
Yeah, I was wondering if John could give us a 2-minute overview, if he's still available.
I wasn't going to talk for the rest of this session, but since I saw the question then, and I figured it'd eventually get to me. So just a couple, so I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. It's obviously difficult. So PMI bought 2 things last year. One is they bought Discipline Agile. The other thing was that they also bought a Flex from a company called Net Objectives. And so that's being incorporated into PMI's portfolio of offerings and standards. So the question is about Discipline Agile. And so here's the book for Discipline Agile. All right. And so I'll give you the 2 minutes so about Discipline Agile. Discipline Agile is not a methodology. It is a toolkit. And it's a toolkit that it can potentially extend other methodologies, but it doesn't have to. So for example, it doesn't say that Scrum is bad. It doesn't say safe is bad. It doesn't say any of the Agile methodology is bad. However, the 2 important guiding principles for Discipline Agile, and there's a whole bunch, of course, but the 2 important ones is that 1, context counts, which is the context that your project is being executed in. The second thing the important thing about Discipline Agile is that it says that choice is good. So rather than being and again, this gets a little controversial perhaps within this group because I know a lot of people adopt Scrum and so forth, is that Whereas in Scrum, you would talk about Scrum. There are people who are Scrum or you're Scrum butt. All right. And so as far as discipline agile is concerned, that's fine. You do whatever works in your particular context. So the way the toolkit works is that it has identified certain processes that are common in projects. And within those processes, it tells you important decision points that you need to consider. And then based on your decisions at those decision points, it offers a whole bunch of options that you can choose from, depending on, again, your context. So again, the way Discipline Agile would look at Scrum, or in particular, even SAFe all the more, is that it says, we're not that prescriptive as they are. You don't have to have an Agile release train. You don't need to have a solution release train, depending on your context. So that's about 2 minutes. Is that enough, Henry?
It's 2 minutes, so you did a good job, John.
Again, I'll just repeat what I said at the very beginning. We are going to have a presentation that I've planned for early May about Discipline Agile. So look for the announcements about that, and it'll be in a forum just like this too, in Zoom with 100 people.
That's great. Thank you very much, John.
Oh, you're welcome,
Appreciate it.
Henry.
I think we met the definition of done.
Okay, the next one here is velocity estimating. Discuss velocity estimating. Whoever brought this one up, can you give them more context?
Yeah, this Joe, and basically I wanted to try to get better estimates, or maybe get an idea from everybody, how many sprints or stories that have to be done before you can get a fairly good estimate of the velocity, and maybe discuss that a little more. I might even have it, incorrect, but if someone could give a little more definition to that, I'd appreciate it.
No, want me to take the first pass?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Bob.
All right. The recommendation is you have a velocity when you have completed 3 sprints, and you always take the average of the last 3 sprints. So pretty much what that means is, let's say, and again, it's using what we call story points. It's not how many hours a team is working, how many hours a task is going to take. It's more like how much effort is a task. Like, I always like to use like an apartment complex, like you're the landlord. If you're going to put a door lock in, that might be a 1-point story. If you're going to replace a faucet on a sink, that might be a 3-point story. So basically what has to happen is the team has to come together and decide what, look at one story and say, okay, this particular piece of effort, it might be setting up a rest service, all right? So that the team would say, I'm doing this type of story would be 3 points. So then when they do their estimating, they basically would estimate the next story based on, is it more difficult or is it less difficult? And basically it just takes time and it takes a little bit of practice, but once the team starts figuring it out and getting their estimates really in line, it's amazing. You can do a lot of release planning, you can do a lot of planning with this. And again, you would use, it's a rolling average. It's always the last 3 sprints, you just take the average. And basically what that does is give you a guideline. It says, okay, my team completed 10 points on the first sprint, 10 points on the second, and 20 points on, let me make it easy, 30 points on the third. So now I take 30 plus 10 plus 10, and that basically gives 50 points. When I divide that by 3, it comes out to be somewhere around 18, 17. So basically what that would say is, when my team is doing their estimating for the next sprint, they should target somewhere around 17 points, because that's based on knowing that, what they're able to complete as far as the amount of work. You also need to consider if anybody has planned vacation during the sprint, if anybody's out, you know, all those things come into consideration, but it's just really a guideline. And it's really amazing if you really practice Scrum and basically drive. If you went to Nitin and my presentation last year on the philosophy of Agile, there's this whole concept of called scrumming the Scrum, where basically the team looks at how to improve themselves sprint after sprint. And what you'll find is that a really good Scrum team will start accelerating. They'll do 20 points, they'll do 25, they'll do 30. And it's basically not having them work more is because they're actually improving. They're looking at what slowed them down in the last sprint and removing it. And it's just one or two things the team picks to attack on the next sprint. And it really does work. I did it with my teams in Jersey City, and it was totally amazing. And also you maintain high quality.
Thank you. So can I also ask what happens when the team changes? If you add or replace a member, do you have to start all over again with the estimates?
If it's just one member or two members, you can expect your team to slow down, because what will happen is the new members will be a distraction for the more seasoned members as far as for training, things like that. But you basically would look at what the team is doing with the velocity, and basically maybe, you know, take like a 10 or 20% and say, you know, this is what this new person's going to cost. So basically, you know, you can expect maybe somewhat of a reduction in velocity. And it really depends on the experience of the new person and what you're going to have them working on. And then usually a new person takes between 2 to 4 sprints to get up to speed. So just by, you know, if you look at Frederick Brooks' Mythical Man Month, just by adding bodies, you're not going to speed things up. You're actually going to slow things down. And so the same thing will happen with new team members. But that's life. People, you know, people will come and go.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jet, how can we access your previous presentations?
It's basically if you go to the PMI New Jersey website, I can actually show you after we're done with this. What'll happen at 7 o'clock Eastern time, we will stop the meeting, but then we'll stay on for people that just want to talk. What I could do is share my screen, and I'll show you exactly where that presentation is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Isn't that a great saying? No matter how many pages you add in a printer, it won't print any faster. Yeah, just to supplement what Bob said, velocity is still a little misunderstood, and certainly as you add or remove or rotate people, the dynamic changes, so the numbers do change over there. The one thing to keep in mind is it's always going to be relative estimation. So I don't know if I'm presenting well on the camera, but if I hold up 2 objects, a bottle of water and a cup, can you tell which one's taller than the other? Yeah, much quicker, right? Obviously the bottle. But if I asked you, can you tell me how many inches this bottle is and how many inches this cup is? We're going to have a lot of different answers and debate and possibly arguments. And some might even say, well, why not centimeters or millimeters, you know? And this gets into hours versus points and so on. So keep velocity as relative estimation, anticipate some rotation. It's meant to be something for the dev team to figure out how much they can consume. It's helpful for product owners to make forecasts, but please be gentle in how you use it. So anyway, that's my wax on, wax off Zen philosophy over there for a moment. Should we move on?
We have 2 minutes, so now basically we would normally go into a Q&A.